All right. Good morning, evening, wherever you are. Right. So, welcome back to another session with me. My name is Hafiz. I am from H. Education, and we will be continuing our session for IELTS training. Right. Today, we're going to focus more on IELTS academic task two. Now, for anyone who has just recently watched this, we do have this session almost every day from Monday to Friday at the same time. So around this time, wherever you're watching from, and it will last for at least 45 minutes, right? And we'll basically discuss a lot of tips and tricks, approaches, sample answers, model answer, different rubrics, right? On every single question type that you might find in the IELTS exam. Okay, so we've already covered reading, we've already covered general training, task one, informal letter, formal letter, etc. Okay, so we're going to continue that. There's a lot of different question types that we can cover in different lessons, different questions, and hopefully for anyone watching, this will be very useful in your preparation for IELTS. Now, everything that I cover in these sessions are also covered in all the courses on the HSAT Education website. So we have the link below in the description. If you would like to check that out, it has everything that you need, right? Templates, video training, materials, tips and tricks, you name it. So please do check them out. It's self-paced and money back guarantee if you do not achieve your target. All right. Okay, now on with the agenda for today, and that is IELTS Academic Task 2. We've already covered on two sessions that the rubric is pretty crucial to always remember, right? And I'm not going to show it again here, right? But it will be a constant reminder. Today, we're going to discuss mainly four things. Number one is important points to remember for task two. Task two is completely different to task one. Keep that in mind, right? For me personally, this is a lot more challenging, but right, it's a big but, right? You have to make sure that you still give a fair amount of time on it. Not to say that you should focus more on task two and less on task one. Both are equally important, but for task two specifically, it is a lot more challenging, right? We'll get to that point a little later. The second one is strategy and planning. So for every type of IELTS task two, what should you do first and foremost, right? What steps do you need to take, etc., etc. The third is the structure and flow. I will also go through some specific templates that you can use, right? And I'll elaborate on why that template works and the kind of pointers that you will always need to remember in order to successfully implement the template. And last but not least, what might be the challenges? So this is generically speaking, when you are doing any types of IELTS task to writing question, academics, right? There will be specific challenges, right, that you have to expect, right? And that expectation should turn into a training plan for you. Okay, and hopefully you'll be able to focus a lot more on your weak areas and the kind of things that you can start getting aware of, like, yeah, I'm not really good at this, so that's what I'm going to focus on next. All right, okay, so let's start immediately with the first agenda, right? The important points. Okay, so number one is the pay attention to the type of questions, similar to IELTS task one. For the writing task one, there are a lot of different question types for IELTS task two. You need to pay attention to what type of questions they're asking. There's usually a direct question, agree or disagree, advantages, disadvantages, solution essays, descriptive essays, and so on and so forth. Right now, while the template usually don't differ that significantly, right? Usually the big difference will be in how you deliver your points. Right? But for today specifically, we're going to focus on the agree and disagree question. We'll cover all the different types of questions in future sessions, hopefully, right? But I guarantee you that the approach won't differ that much. Okay, the second one is you have to understand the question. So what does that mean? How is that different from the first one? Well, the first one is focusing on the type of question, right? The second one is focusing on the topic. Now, as you might have already noticed when we did the reading section, right? You do get topics that you are not familiar with. Same thing with task one. Task two is no different, right? You will get some topics where you go, actually, I don't really know anything about that, right? So you do need to understand the topic for as well, because if you kind of force your way through, let's say you get a question talking about the economy, right? And you're someone who's barely into college and you're in arts major, you know nothing about the economy, and you go like, all right, I'm just gonna make something up. Try not to do that just yet. Try to understand first the concept of the topic subject, which will lead us to the planning section later on, right? And this is also strongly connected to this third point. Do not rush, right? You do have 40 minutes for this section, right? It's not a lot of time, believe me, right? But you still cannot rush, right? Never ever rush your essays, whether for task one or task two. Specifically for task two, right? It's a lot longer. You need to write 250 words, more than 250 words. So if you rush, make any unnoticeable mistake or a mistake that you notice a lot later, it will cost you points. Right? It will make you panic, especially if you don't manage your time well and you realize that you only have like 5 minutes left at the end and you realize, oh, wait, there's actually a lot of mistakes in my essay. Got to correct them all. Okay, so do not rush. Okay, last but not least, pay attention to, sorry, not last, the fourth point, pay attention to the time, leave time to check at the end. Now, why is this crucial? Well, of course, it's because number one, you have to finish within that time frame, right? 40 minutes. And with task one as well, 20 minutes, right? You have to make sure that you finish both, right? Now, what does that mean? You, for task two specifically, because you get 40 minutes, right? The essay is obviously longer. So it's a lot easier to notice if you make a mistake, right? It's a lot easier to notice. So you do need to make sure that you always leave time to check at the end, right? Because your sentences are a lot longer, and you're writing opinions or descriptions that is purely your idea, right? So it's not like in IELTS task one where you're basically just saying whatever is visible, right? And all you have to do is just focus on the vocabulary and maybe check the structure a little bit. And it's like 150 words, so 100 word less. So in task two, that's like almost double. So you are going to be a lot more liable for your mistakes, right? It's going to be very clear to check, sorry, very easy to check, right? And it can be unforgiving. So you have to pay attention to the time. Make sure you leave some time at the end to check everything that you have written. And last but not least, the fifth one is remember the rubric. Right. I'm not pasting it here again, right? But just to give you a recap, four categories: task achievement, lexical resources, vocabulary, grammar accuracy and range, and cohesion. Right. You have to score well in all section in order to get a really good overall score for your writing. So if I just give a quick demonstration, this is just really quick, right? So if your tasks, large that, right? If your task is, let's say, a band 8, okay, you answered the question very well. You didn't kind of go out of places and pretty focus on what you're trying to deliver. And then in your cohesion, okay, it's smooth. Your structure is really great. And lexicon, okay, lots of range, lots of no mistake in accuracy, lots of range of vocabulary. But then when it comes to grammar, right? Okay, you made the essay with perfect grammar, but you don't show the range. Like you continuously stick with simple compound sentences, right? You didn't make any mistake, but you did not show any range. And yeah, if that's the case, you can drop as significantly as a four. Sorry, as significantly to as much as to a four, right? And that will push your overall score way, way down. Where you might get even a six. So make sure that you always keep that in mind, right? You have to score well in all four categories in order to get a very satisfying outcome at the end. All right. So those are the important points. Take it as introduction for IELTS Task 2. Now let's take a look at the sample question immediately, but we're going to dissect it first before we take a model answer. Right. So first things first, let's discuss a little bit about the planning here. Right. So before you write, similar to task one, do not immediately start writing. Right, just a reminder to everyone who's watching, folks, okay, to anyone who's going to watch as well later. You need to plan first. Do not rush. Okay, do not do not start writing answer immediately. Very important. Remember, especially if you're taking the paper-based test, any mistakes you make is going to be fatal. Right? You're gonna have to erase it again, and your paper is gonna look dirty. This doesn't look that good. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the question. Studying English language in an English-speaking country is the best, but not the only way to learn language. Do you agree or disagree with the statement? So the only way to learn the language, missing the there. Okay, so first things first. Okay, this is the agree and disagree question type. Okay, so what you need to always keep in mind for this type of question specifically, right? You have to give a straight answer. Do not go back and forth, right? Do not try to balance it out. Like you go, all right, I'd agree, right? But maybe I do disagree as well in some point. That is not this type of question. Okay, so if you get a direct question, this is like one of the direct types of questions, you have to answer it straight up. Okay, there will be questions where you do need to balance, like advantages outweigh the disadvantages. To what extent do you agree or disagree? In those kind of questions, you are allowed to balance your answer. Okay, but if it's a straight, direct answer it directly. Do not dwell too much on it. Okay, and this is going to be a recurring theme throughout any questions that you do. You got to make sure that you answer the question what they want, right? This is a direct question. Do you agree or disagree? Okay, so if you agree, plan it out. If you disagree, plan it out. How do you plan it out? Here it is, right? So you have to list your reason immediately, whether you agree or disagree. And I do recommend you try and brainstorm as many as possible that you can, right? I would say make the planning about 5 minutes. So out of the 40 minutes, do spend just 5 minutes planning it out, right? You don't have to rush and try to start the answer as soon as you can. Okay, so the recommended number of reason or opinions for IELTS Class 2 is about three. So what does that mean? Of course, into the structure, that will mean that you will need three body paragraphs at the very least. So in addition to that, you'll also need one introduction and one conclusion. Okay, so you have to list your reasoning, your opinion first, right? As brief as it may be, just list it out first, right? So for example, based on this question, right? So we're gonna do just an example planning here. Okay, studying in the English language in an English-speaking country is the best, but not the only way to learn language. Again, important to read the question, make sure that you're not misinterpreting it. Okay, make sure that you are in cohesion with what the question is asking. All right, so let's say I agree. Right? This is as an example. Right? It is the best, but not the only way to learn the language. Now, I can take a couple of approaches here, but at least two. The first one, so I can basically mention right two things, reasons for, sorry, not reasons, other ways in which we can learn English, right? Other than, like studying in the English speaking country. And the second thing here is I can also list why learning in the English language in an English speaking country is the best. So those two different points, right? So let's start off with other ways to learn English. Okay, so I would list first reason is online courses. Of course, especially if we apply that in the modern age, lots of online courses, right? Very great, very available. And then after that, even in the planning, try to expand it, right? So because this will be integral to the structure that we will cover in just a moment. Okay, expand it a little bit. So lots, for example, right? Lots of available high quality courses, right? Including like HZ education for cheap or even free, right? And then I can give an example. So of course, the one that we can immediately use is HZ education, right? Or Udemy, etc. Right? Do write the example as well, right? Or evidence in that regards, right? Because you it will make your explanation a lot stronger. Okay. Now, does your opinion matter? Whether you choose agree or disagree. I think that that's something I should have explained first in the beginning, but I can do that now. No, it doesn't, right? Whether you're right or wrong, it won't really impact your score. What will impact your score is basically whether your answer makes sense, whether you have delivered the argument rationally, logically, right? And not write something that's far fetched and just ridiculous. Okay? Please keep that in mind. So it's similar to, I think, we haven't actually covered speaking, but similar to speaking that we'll cover hopefully in a near session, right? It's that you don't need to tell the truth. Right? You might not be too knowledgeable in this topic that you're being asked about, right? But that doesn't mean you cannot lie. You can absolutely, right? Come up with anything that you know makes sense. Not that you know is the truth, that you know makes sense, right? Remember, this is an English test, not a knowledge test. All right. So if you struggle to kind of come up with some ideas, that can be one of the challenges that you might need to focus on. That's something we'll also cover towards the end of the session. Okay, so that's one example, for example. The second one is, let's say, another way is schools, right? Even those in non-English speaking countries, they teach English. Schools teach, well, almost everywhere. Let's write it down. Almost everywhere teaches English, right? Even in Asian countries, for example. I can, you know, make that into one package, the expansion and the example, because obviously Asian countries, they don't have English as their first language. So that makes it as an expansion. And if you want to push for an example, just name any Asian countries that you want. All right. So that's basically an example, right? There you can, of course, you'll need to write the third one, just to make sure. And you have to kind of be very clear about what you want to deliver. So everything that you need before you write, right, must be written beforehand, as in before you write the full answer, the real answer, must be written beforehand. You plan it out exactly like this, right? And then write at least 3 points and focus on being consistent as well, right? If you agree, right, make sure every point, every reasoning that you put in there support your argument, right? So it has to be consistent throughout from beginning towards the end. That's part of the task achievement, task fulfillment, and that's also part of the cohesion, right? Because if your points does not kind of complement one another, right? They do not support each other. that counts as you not being able to deliver your argument effectively. So that counts as one of your English ability, right? It's slightly different when you talk about like, okay, substance wise, it might not make too much sense. It doesn't like sound like truthful, but if you kind of deliver it in a way that, yeah, that might work. I think I can take that. I can believe that. And you're much more likelier to get a better score in that situation. Okay. Now let's take a look at the structure here. We'll take a look at the paragraph later. So let's take a look at the structure here. Okay, so generally, you will be recommended to write 5 paragraphs. This is probably for me as well. It's one of the best recommendation that you should definitely try and do. Right? Why is that? Because again, we plan for 3 points, right? And and in addition to that, when you have 3 body paragraphs, you have a really good chance to show your ability to expand your ideas. If you only have 2, yes, you might be able to show the expansion, right? But if you kind of like miss just a little bit, you won't have any safety net, right? With a third point, it might complement the both argument previously before, right? And you can also showcase a lot more variety of structures, right? Grammar, range and accuracy. Don't forget, for both range and accuracy, you need to showcase it for both vocabulary and grammar. So having 3 opinions or 3 reasons or 3 arguments is very ideal, and it gives you the best opportunity to showcase all of those abilities. Okay, so what does the structure look like? The first is an introduction. Okay, but in the introduction, all you have to do is literally paraphrase. No, sorry, paraphrase the statement from the question plus your opinion. Okay. So what does that mean? So we have the question statement here, right? Studying the English language in an English speaking country is the best, but not the only way to learn the language. That's all you need for the introduction. So all you need to do is just take that and paraphrase it. Now, compared to task 1, the paraphrasing here can be a lot more flexible, because in task 1, a lot of the times you're usually, well, not usually, but it's very likely that you'll be limited to only changing the vocabulary, right? Like just find another synonym of the word in that question. But with task 2, you can literally create a new structure, a new sentence structure with different vocabularies, but still maintain the essence of the question. Right. So we'll see one of the examples later on, right? And in addition to that, you do have to introduce your opinion. Now, be careful with this part, right? This is introducing your opinion, not specifying your opinion. You have to make sure that you write simply whether you disagree or not. Try not to expand to the point where you literally say what are your arguments immediately in the first paragraph, right? You're saying whether you disagree or not is more than enough for the introduction part. Okay, all right, and then after that, the 3 body paragraphs are simply your reasons, your opinions, similar to IELTS general training in the with the informal letter that we did last time. Do not mix them up. You can, again, you can introduce and the next idea in the previous paragraph, right? And show that expansion, that the next idea is a development of the previous idea, right? But do not, let's say, for example, in body paragraph 1, you discuss online courses, but halfway through that paragraph, you literally touched on schools almost everywhere teach English, right? So you literally discuss two you literally discuss 2 points in one paragraph. Be careful with that, right? One paragraph should only contain one topic. Do not write more than that. Okay? It's not something that's recommended at all. right? And then last but not least is the conclusion. So the conclusion is simply summarizing the body paragraphs that you have just written. But there is a crucial point to be made here. For the summary of the reason, the conclusion, do not write anything new. So I'm gonna put that in. Do not write anything new, right? So what does that mean? So if you have point, let's say the first reason is the online courses, second reason schools everywhere teach English, third reason, let's say you can learn easily from a friend, right? Or just attend extracurricular activity at school, etc. Whichever, right? And then in the conclusion, you mention all those three, but then you suddenly say something that you did not mention in the previous three paragraphs. So, for example, right, you mentioned something along the lines, right? Oh, well, in addition to that, sometimes learning independently is also a possibility. Like you did not discuss anything about learning independently in the previous body paragraphs, but it appears in the conclusion. Please be careful with that. Conclusion is literally concluding, like you're summarizing what you've basically just talked about. So if you did not talk about a certain topic, it shouldn't be in the conclusion. Okay? Right, be careful with that. Now, one of the biggest challenge, of course, when it comes to writing the answer is how I write the body paragraphs, right? Because the introduction and conclusion is pretty clear. For the body paragraphs, there is actually a good template, right? That you can practice on your own, memorize, right? And just check on your own. Now, in regards to this template for the body paragraph structure, right? You can play with it a little bit in terms of how many sentences you put into each point, but the flow should not change, right? It should be in this order. All right. So first sentence, you have to say the reason why you agree or disagree. Okay, so for each body paragraph, the first sentence, it will contain like your main reasoning, the main topic. So it's a topic sentence, right? And then the next sentence, you will explain or expand your reason based on your first sentence. Right? So far, so good. The fourth sentence, you need to give that example. That's why we planned that ahead. You need to explain a little bit of that example, right? And then last but not least, in the last sentence, the end of that paragraph, you will write a short summary of ideas. So you'll basically rephrase, right, the entire thing in just one sentence. Okay, I'll show you what that looks like in a bit, right? But there is a couple of things that I will add right now that everyone who is going to IELTS should always remember, right? Power number one: do not wordy. Okay. Now, different to IELTS Task 1, it's very easy to notice when you're wordy for IELTS Task 1, right? Because the things that you can say are limited. And you sometimes even struggle to reach that threshold of 150 words, right? But with IELTS Writing Task 2, especially one of the biggest mistakes that I see quite frequently among my students is that when they actually get a question that they're actually knowledgeable at, they are kind of like thrust into telling the truth and show off what they know, right? And what ended up happening was that their essay became very wordy. They said things that weren't needed. They said things that like could have been easily removed, and they said things that have been repeated a couple of times. Sometimes in different ways, but essentially still the same thing. Right? So please do not be wordy, do not be redundant. That is still part of the grading rubric in the sense of task fulfillment and cohesion as well. Because if you are wordy, right, the flow of your writing will feel interrupted. Be careful with that, right? And the second thing that I would like to highlight right now before we jump into a sample uh, question and a sample answer, right, is that uh, do not force yourself. to use fancy words. Right? Now, I understand that I said that many times vocabulary, range, and accuracy, right? But this is specifically towards fancy word. You do not have to be bombastic in the way you speak, right? You just need to make sure that you have enough in your arsenal to make sure you're not repeating your words and that you are using words that doesn't go into the category of ambiguity. I'll give you an example. If you want to describe a good person, right? Like if you say in your essay, okay, for example, a good person is, it's like good is just not a word to complement that, right? Like good is pretty ambiguous because it doesn't really tell a lot about what you're trying to say. If you say a good chair, what does that mean? If you say a good person, what does that mean? Does that mean that person is kind? Does that mean that person is polite, or all of them? Right. So you have to make sure that you do have some words in your arsenal that will help you, use a blanket word that can cover all of those definitions or cover a more profound definition of what you're trying to say. Okay, so those two things I just want to remind you at this point before we get into the question. Now, into the question for the last 15 minutes session, right? Now, I also have here a model answer. I wouldn't say a model, right? It's not that good, but we will kind of try to see if we can make it better based on what we've learned. Okay? So I'll start off with the introduction. Okay, so here in the introduction, studying a language in a country where it is widely spoken has many advantages. It is, therefore, a good idea to study English in a country such as Britain. Now, you can see that in the introduction itself, right? It might be just slightly wordy. Personally, for just slightly wordy, right? It can be more efficiently delivered. Now, a lot of the times in IELTS task 2, right? The start, there are a couple of phrases at the start that you can literally memorize, right? And just use it whenever it is most suitable. So, for example, right, you can use phrases like "it is believed that," right? It is believed that, right? It is thought that. So that passive structure, sorry, that passive form in the beginning, very useful, right? And you can say many firmly. You can add expression, add adjectives, right? If you are confident with using it, etc. Right? So that's something that you can usually use in the beginning. Now here it doesn't use that, which is okay, right? And let's see where the problem slightly lies. Studying a language in a country where it is widely spoken has many advantages. Okay, so first things first, one good point, right? Where it is widely spoken. And that's literally another word or another phrase for English speaking country. Right? Unfortunately, it can also be open to interpretation because there are some countries where English is widely spoken, but it's not the first language. Like everyone knows English, it's just not the first language, right? Um, has many advantages, right? And here, this is probably one where I would change as well. It has many advantages. So here, this person is trying to say another way for the best, right? But is has many advantages. The best way to paraphrase that, right? There are a couple of ways, of course. Studying a language in a country where it is widely spoken can be the most effective to learn English, right? Or to learn that language, to learn said language can be the most impactful to learn that language, right? Etc. Etc. Right? It has many advantages. Personally, for me, doesn't say it's the best, right? Because if the advantages are not as impactful as the disadvantages, that can be open to questions, right? But is it wrong? Not really, right? It's just that there are better ways to paraphrase the best. So that's an example of making sure that you are using the accuracy of your vocabulary. Okay. It is therefore a good idea, this is something we just talked about, a good idea to study English in a country such as Britain. So this person immediately gave an example of Britain. Is that a problem? Not really, right? If you, does it make any difference if you don't mention that? Not really as well. Right? But one thing that I think you guys all know that I'm gonna immediately comment is a good idea, right? This can be made a lot stronger, of course. I personally would avoid using the word good. There are so many words that are much better than good. And even the word like great, excellent would be, something that's, is more profound. Okay, so I would avoid that. Okay, so it's therefore an excellent idea or the most effective way to study English, like I said, right? So why did that sound wordy? Because technically, this part and this part can be combined into just one sentence. So it doesn't need a therefore. It doesn't need to be made into a complex sentence just yet. Right? So that's one area where we can improve this. Okay, and then after that, as the structure was laid out before, however, I believe it is not the only way to learn the language. It's not the only way to learn the language. So this part, right? It's almost like copy and paste. It's actually not that good. Now, one of the things that you can never do when it comes to IELTS writing section is use like maybe 80% of the same language word structure of the question statement. Right, you should do your very best to literally change everything unless it's, like a very specific term or scientific terminology that you cannot change because of your lack of knowledge, for example, right? Or it's definitely the best word that is available. Okay, so another way that you can change this too is like, however, I believe that there are other methods, right, to practice the language. For example, right, that changes the entire sentence, right? So this is not a good introduction so far. Okay? Now, I do will comment on one thing, right? And that is the sentence type. Okay. Now, what does that mean? So as I mentioned in the grammar range and accuracy section, you have to show quite a good amount of range, right? So that means you're not relying only on one type of sentence. So, for example, maybe you're relying on simple active sentences or simple passive sentences, right? You have to show compound sentence, complex sentence, conditions, subordinate clauses, relative clauses, right? So, for example, here, right, this person uses at least uses transitional phrases for the next sentence. I believe it is not the only way, right? And use expressions such as I believe. So this made it this kind of avoided from becoming a very simple sentence. If the person, if this person were just to write simply like this, right? Let's say, for example, so remove the however and just say I. It is not only way active language, for example. Right? Now, now in this case, right, you have made the sentence a lot simpler, right? You have made the sentence a lot simpler. It is not the only way to practice that language, right? You do have a to here, so to infinitive. So it's not as simple as like a active sentence with a subject and verb and a complementary, right? But nonetheless, it is less complicated than the sentence here, right? And there are also, other way to make your sentence complex, such as adding modal verbs, auxiliary verbs, tenses, right? Using the perfect tense to describe whatever it is you're arguing, etc., etc. Okay, so far, just from the introduction, it doesn't really sound that good, apart from the range and the accuracy of the grammar. The lexicon part, the vocabulary part, it can definitely do a lot better, right? Okay, let's move on to the first body paragraph. In the first place, You can see, I'm going to highlight this. There's always a transitional phrases in every body paragraph, right? So the most common one being, of course, I think everybody already knows, is that you have firstly, secondly, thirdly, right? You can also change it to finally, etc. What I will say is make the transition consistent, the style, the type of transition that you use. So for example, here, in the first place, and then the second one, this person uses secondly, right? So that's not consistent, right? And it might disrupt the flow when you're reading the entire answer. So just be consistent to be safe, right? Because that will contribute to your cohesion. Then, okay? Most students in non-English speaking countries learn English at secondary school, and many times and sometimes at university nowadays, right? Again, this can be a lot more efficient than it is written here, right? So, for example, let's move the nowadays to the very front, right? So that way it blankets the two arguments together, right? So nowadays, most students, right, in non-English speaking countries learn the language at secondary school as well as university, right? I mean, you don't even have to say and sometimes, right? I think we can all argue that a lot of the times in a lot of the countries, in university, English is almost like mandatory, even in my country right now, right? So we can kind of move the nowadays part to the very beginning, and so and maybe change this to firstly to make the transition a little bit more consistent. Now let's take a look at the next sentence here. Although their spoken English is not usually of a very high standard, right, I would avoid using very as well. Right? There's so many words that can help you avoid the word very. If that's something you're struggling with, do practice that, right? So although their spoken English is not the best or is below sufficient level, is below proficient, yeah, something like that, right? Their knowledge of grammar is often quite advanced. So one thing that is good about this part is just like the expressions, right? Is often quite. Try not to use it too much though, and which speaker learns English, and sometimes, right, for example, here. And one thing that this person managed to do is not repeated certain words too many times apart from the word English. Now, as I mentioned, if the terminology of the word itself is difficult to replace, repetition will be allowed in that regard. But one skill that you can do is replace it with a pronoun. That's why in a couple of the examples that I mentioned before, we changed the word the English language into that language, right, etc., etc. So the English is just kind of remove, or the language itself. You can also try to see if by changing the structure it can be removed. This is certainly useful when the students come to an English-speaking country to perfect the language. Now, what is the big one of the biggest problem with this part of the paragraph, right? So remember, consistency of your topic. The goal of the essay is to say you agree or disagree, and immediately, right, like after I finish reading that first body paragraph, I'm almost lost, right, to like the main point of what this person is basically trying to say. So they say like, this person said like, okay, English, spoken English not usually very high standard, but grammar is quite advanced, right? So they're immediately focus on speaking and grammar. So maybe difference between speaking and writing, perhaps, right? And then this is certainly useful when students come to an English-speaking country to perfect the language. So immediately mention like, okay, if you are, a lot of people already know English, and if you come to an English-speaking country, you can perfect it. Right? So it's now not focusing on other ways that students can learn English, right? And it's starting to mix with that idea that yeah, but if you learn other ways, you still have to learn in English speaking countries, right? So try not to kind of mix more than one idea in the same paragraph, right? And one thing that we should notice by now is that this did not follow the template that we explained, right? There is no examples, okay? And there's no summary of the main idea. Like, what is the student trying to propose, right? Because why is it is important, that last part, especially the last sentence that we talked about, right? The summary, short summary of ideas, sentence number 5. It's because that will remind the reader. That will remind the reader of what they were supposed to follow, right, in that paragraph itself. Okay, and then if we continue with the second body paragraph, studying the basic English secondary school is less stressful than learning the language while overseas. Again, it's like this is not focused on other methods of learning English. It's saying like why learning English in non-English speaking countries is better. So it's like not focusing on the task fulfillment. So far, the first category, the task fulfillment, is not being fully answered, right? And in that regard, this essay's best score will probably be a 6. Right? Yes, granted that grammar might be high because there are no grammar mistake and there's a couple of good ranges, and vocabulary as well. Not perfect vocabulary, right? But the task fulfillment can go as low as a 4 because this is just not being focused, not supporting it, the ideas between paragraphs, etc. And if we continue to the third paragraph and it suddenly switched to however, right? There are obvious advantages to learning English in Britain. Every day there are opportunities to practice listening to and speaking with British people. Okay. Also, students can experience the culture firsthand, which is a great help when trying to understand the language. This is especially true if they choose to live with a British family as exchange students. Right? For example, okay, here it does have examples, right? But at this point, we are already kind of a little bit lost in terms of what this person is trying to focus on. Furthermore, if students attend a language school full time, the teachers will be native speakers. In this case, not only will students' speaking and listening skills improve, but attention can be given to developing reading and writing skills as well. Right? So it made that argument. I think even this one is also an example, right? But again, no summary of what the main idea is about for this paragraph. Again, you can for the cohesion part, this will also not be that good. The highest it can get is a 6, absolutely. Right? So that's why it's important to always remember the rubric, task fulfillment. You got to focus, answer the question, right? So make sure that the ideas are consistent, support one another. Cohesion, make sure that when you're reading from paragraph to paragraph, from beginning to end, that everything connects with one another, that each ideas that you have presented support each other, right? And not try to argue with one another unless it is one of those questions where you have to balance both sides of the argument. Let's take a look at the conclusion real quick. In general, even though it is preferable to study English in an English speaking country, a reasonable level of English can be achieved in one's own country. It says here a reasonable level of English can be achieved in one's own country. Yes, this person did mention that they might have like a decent or advanced grammar, so not decent, advanced grammar, but not a really good speaking ability, right? If a student is gifted and dedicated to study, this part was not mentioned at all, right? So this is why I mentioned that in the beginning, where you have to make sure you're not saying anything that you did not explain, right? In the conclusion, this person did exactly just that. But this one needs to be removed, right? And only focus on summarizing what is in the body paragraph. Okay, so this definitely, right, will only score 6 at the highest. For me personally, I would push that down to a 5, right? Mainly because of the task fulfillment and the cohesion. It just did not feel like this answer met that minimum requirement. Right? Now, hopefully, in another session, we'll take a look at a perfect band. Okay, so a 9 or at least an 8. That's what you want, right? For every section, at least an 8. because that will give you the best opportunity to utilize your IELTS certificate. All right, that's my time for today. Right, for those watching or for those that watches later, please feel free to comment, and don't forget everything that I teach you in every session at this time, right? For every section, every type question type, they're all covered in all the courses that HSOT Education provides. So link in the description below. Please check it out. All right. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow, and hopefully we'll be able to. Well, not we'll be able to. We'll definitely cover IELTS speaking. It's quite fun.